A Roman soldier stands guard at the execution of Jesus Christ. His orders are simple: make sure the prisoner dies. But when darkness falls and the earth shakes, this hardened warrior drops to his knees and speaks words that will echo through history. What happened on that hill changed not just one man's life, but the course of Christianity itself. If you're ready to discover how God can transform even the hardest heart, hit that like button and subscribe to Bible Breakdown Hub. We're here to help you grow deeper in faith through the amazing stories of Scripture. The sky was growing dark over Jerusalem that Friday. Storm clouds were building above a place called Golgotha, waiting for the moment that would divide all of history. At the bottom of 3 wooden crosses, a Roman centurion named Longinus was doing his job. Just another day of carrying out death sentences. But this time, the man hanging on the middle cross was Jesus of Nazareth. Longinus had his orders: make sure Jesus died. And that's exactly what he planned to do. When noon came, complete darkness covered the land. It stayed dark until 3 in the afternoon. Then at 3 o'clock, Jesus shouted out loud, my God, why have you left me alone?" After that, Jesus cried out one more time and took his final breath. Right then, the thick curtain in the temple ripped completely in half from top to bottom. The centurion who was standing right there watching said, "This man really was the Son of God." That day changed everything for this Roman soldier. The man whose job was to watch Jesus die was shaken to his very soul. He went from being someone who killed people to someone who witnessed a miracle. From stabbing Jesus with a spear to becoming the first non-Jewish person to believe Jesus really was God's son. He gave up his high position in the strongest empire on earth and joined Jesus's followers. He traveled to faraway places, telling everyone the good news with the passion of someone who had seen it all happen and whose life was completely changed. But his story ended tragically, and he's remembered in church history by the name Longinus. Before that dark Friday, Longinus had been a Roman centurion. These were army commanders who led more than 100 soldiers each. They were officers that everyone respected for being tough, brave, and really good at their jobs. His whole life was about being strong, using force, and doing whatever Rome told him to do. To become a centurion, you needed more than just muscles. You had to be smart, good at planning battles, and most importantly, you had to be willing to do whatever it took. Longinus was all of these things. His life was about rules, keeping order, and following Rome's commands without question. He had watched people die without even blinking. He followed orders without stopping to think twice. He had become like a tool that the empire used. Until that day. The city wasn't fully awake yet, but you could already hear quick footsteps and quiet voices whispering a name that spread through the shadows: Jesus of Nazareth. The night before, he had been arrested in a garden called Gethsemane. One of his own followers, Judas Iscariot, had betrayed him with a kiss for 30 pieces of silver. They took him to the Sanhedrin, the council of religious leaders, who said he was guilty of speaking against God because he claimed to be God's son. There they hit him, spit on him, and said he deserved to die, but they couldn't execute him themselves. For that, they needed permission from Rome. So at sunrise, they brought him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Pilate, sitting in his judge's chair, looked at Jesus with curiosity and asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered calmly, "You have said it." The chief priests and elders kept making accusations, but Jesus stayed quiet. Pilate, confused, leaned toward him and said, "Don't you hear all these things they're saying about you? Aren't you going to defend yourself?" Jesus said nothing, not one word. He didn't try to explain himself or argue back. Pilate was amazed. He had seen criminals beg, lie, and cry to save their lives, but this man had incredible calmness. Just then, a messenger rushed up to the judgment seat. He brought an urgent message from Pilate's wife. "Don't have anything to do with this innocent man." I had a terrible dream about him today." Pilate shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He could sense that something much bigger than himself was happening, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. During Passover, it was tradition to set one prisoner free. Pilate saw this as his way out and gave the crowd a choice: Jesus or Barabbas, a well-known criminal and murderer. But the priests and religious leaders stirred up the crowd to shout angrily, "Release Barabbas!" Pilate raised his hands and asked, "Then what should I do with Jesus?" The crowd roared with rage, "Crucify him!" Feeling uneasy, Pilate asked again, "Why? What crime has he done?" But their answer was even fiercer: "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate could see clearly that he was powerless against the rising wave of anger. He took a bowl of water and washed his hands in front of everyone, saying, "I am not responsible for this innocent man's death. That's on you." Then Pilate freed Barabbas. He handed Jesus over to be crucified. The Son of God's fate was decided. The soldiers took Jesus into the courthouse. The Centurion Longinus stood firmly at the entrance, just like always. He had watched dozens of punishments. He had seen many men die. But today something felt completely different. The prisoner in front of them didn't fight back. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He didn't beg. He took every hit as if he knew it had to happen. The soldiers, thinking it was funny, stripped off his clothes. They tied him tightly to a post and began whipping him without mercy. The whip came down again and again, tearing his skin without any pity. But even then, he didn't cry out. Longinus watched with his arms crossed, his face marked by years of violence. But something in his eyes was starting to change. The other soldiers made fun of him. They put a purple robe on his shoulders, twisted together a crown of thorns, and pushed it down on his head. Blood ran down his face, but his eyes stayed open, steady, and calm. They put a stick in his hands like it was a king's scepter, got down on their knees in front of him, and laughed while shouting mockingly, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Longinus didn't join in their cruel game. He just watched. And for the first time in years, he felt uncomfortable. Not because of the violence, but because of how dignified this beaten man remained. They spit on him and hit him over and over on the head with the stick. Finally, when they got tired of their cruel game, they tore off the robe, put his own clothes back on him, and got him ready for crucifixion. But Longinus couldn't look away. Something inside him that had been sleeping was starting to wake up. He couldn't understand why this man wouldn't defend himself. He couldn't understand why, even while being humiliated, there was no hatred on his face, only deep compassion. While others laughed, he began asking himself, who really is this man? He didn't know yet, but very soon he would find out, because that day Longinus would witness the greatest act of love the world had ever seen, and from then on, his life would never be the same. The soldiers grabbed Jesus, pushed him out of the courthouse, and placed a rough, heavy cross on his shoulders. It was already stained with the blood of other condemned men. The walk toward Golgotha had begun. The Centurion Longinus marched at the front, clearing a path through the crowd. It was his job to lead the prisoner to the place of crucifixion, Golgotha, the Hill of Skulls, where Rome sent those they wanted to forget to die. Jesus moved forward through the shouting crowd. Some spit on him, others threw insults, but there were also those who quietly wept. In the middle of the crowd, his mother Mary desperately searched for him with her eyes. She couldn't see him, so she turned to the disciple John. "John, help me. Take me to my son." Together they pushed through the crowd, but suddenly a soldier shoved Jesus hard. His weakened body collapsed onto the stones. It was the first time he fell. Jesus fell, and the cross crashed down on top of him. Soldiers hit him again, yelling fiercely, "Get up!" With painful effort, Jesus slowly got up again. Mary and John reached him just as Jesus fell a second time. Mary couldn't hold back anymore. She rushed to his side, knelt beside him with trembling hands and eyes full of sorrow. In a broken voice she whispered, "I am here." Jesus lifted his bloody face and softly replied, "You see, Mother, I make all things new." It wasn't just words of comfort. It was a living prophecy of what was about to happen. The heavy cross pressed into his wounded back. His body was already giving out, and Jesus fell once again. The soldiers whipped him to force him up, but he couldn't get up. His knees wouldn't respond anymore. Longinus watched closely. He had seen it before, men defeated, men broken. But Jesus wasn't defeated. There was something in him that couldn't be broken. Then Longinus the Centurion grabbed a man from the countryside who was walking by and ordered him, "You there, pick up that cross." Slowly, Jesus raised himself. His eyes looked for those of the stranger, and though he was exhausted, he gave a look filled with gratitude. As they continued, Simon helped Jesus carry his cross. A death march moved through the streets, witnessed by the whole city. Women wept openly. Bleeding and tired, Jesus turned toward them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Cry instead for yourselves and for your children." Longinus heard those words, and once again something shook deep inside him. Who was this man who, even on the edge of collapse, could think about others? Finally, they reached Golgotha, a dry, empty hill reserved for horror. The 3 crosses were already prepared, and the soldiers began their work. Jesus didn't struggle. He didn't curse or fight back. He stretched out his arms as if he was willingly offering his body, as if he was giving himself freely. Then came the moment. One soldier held down his arm, another raised the hammer. A cry pierced the heavens. Mary shuddered. John looked away. The crowd murmured. At every blow of the hammer, some wept while others kept mocking. And Longinus stood there, not moving. When the 3 men were crucified, Jesus in the center, a criminal on each side, the soldiers struggled to raise the crosses upright. The wooden post sank into its hole with a heavy thud, and Jesus' body shook violently from the impact. The criminals crucified beside Jesus screamed. One of them glared at Jesus with contempt and shouted, "Aren't you supposed to be the Christ? Then save yourself and save us too." But the other criminal, weakly but with sincerity in his voice, told off the first one and said, "Don't you even fear God, seeing that you're under the same sentence? We deserve our punishment. We're getting what our actions deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned toward Jesus and whispered, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied with a promise whose echo would ring throughout eternity. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Longinus, watching from his post, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had witnessed many executions, but he'd never seen anyone like Jesus. Time passed, but the world itself seemed to stand still. The sunlight faded, and a blanket of darkness covered the whole land. Longinus stood guard, his eyes fixed on Jesus hanging on the cross. Jesus still spoke, but his words weren't cries of pain. They were words of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." A shiver ran through Longinus's chest. Forgiveness for those who whipped him, for those who nailed him down, for those who mocked him, even for him. In the distance, thunder began to rumble. A storm was coming. Caiaphas, satisfied, left with the other religious leaders, but Mary stayed there, heartbroken with grief, while John gently held her close. In a weak but clear voice, Jesus spoke, "Woman, look at your son." Then turning to John, he said, "Look at your mother." Jesus' body began to fail, and suddenly, with a cry that shattered the silence, he called out to heaven, my God, why have you left me alone?" Some nearby thought he was calling for Elijah. They believed he was begging for heavenly help, that the prophet himself would come to rescue him. One bystander ran, soaked a sponge with vinegar, put it on a reed, and raised it to Jesus' lips. But Jesus didn't drink. He refused comfort. His sacrifice had to be complete. A serious silence fell over the scene. Jesus lifted his eyes, knowing the end was near. Then, gathering every last bit of strength he had, he cried out, "It is finished!" Heaven held its breath. And for the last time, Jesus raised his eyes to the sky and said, "Father, into your hands I give my spirit." With those words, he bowed his head and died. Suddenly, the earth answered. At that very moment, the ground under everyone's feet began to shake. A violent earthquake shook Jerusalem. Rocks split apart, tombs broke open, and the temple curtain tore in two from top to bottom. The crowd fell silent. Faces that once mocked were now filled with terror. Many began beating their chests, realizing what they had done. Then the Centurion Longinus dropped to his knees. Words escaped from his lips before he could stop them. With a trembling voice, he declared out loud, "Truly this man was the Son of God." The centurion who oversaw his crucifixion became the first non-Jewish person to publicly acknowledge the crucified Christ. And then silence fell like a blanket over Golgotha. Jesus' body hung lifeless. The soldiers, disturbed by the growing unrest, began to leave. The crowd, confused and fearful, scattered. It was preparation day for the Passover, and Jewish custom demanded that no bodies remain on the crosses during the Sabbath. So they went to Pilate asking that the legs of the condemned be broken to speed up their deaths. The order was passed to the Centurion Longinus, and he gave the command without hesitation. The soldiers grabbed a heavy iron bar, went to the thieves crucified beside Jesus, and broke their legs. Longinus knew that Jesus was already dead, but it was his duty to make sure. It was Roman law. So Longinus took up his spear, moved toward the cross, and with one quick thrust pierced Jesus' side. And in that moment, blood and water flowed out. The Apostle John, who was standing there, would later seriously write, "And he who saw it has testified, and his testimony is true." Longinus stared at the wound, and then at his spear stained with that pure blood. Without knowing it, he had just witnessed the fulfillment of the prophecy. They will look on him whom they have pierced. It was a symbol. Blood to save, water to cleanse. The blood fell on his face, and tradition tells us that his eyes had been suffering from a sickness that clouded his vision. But as soon as that sacred mixture touched his eyes, his sight was restored. Right there at the foot of the cross, beneath the skies still weeping, Longinus finally understood. He understood that he hadn't executed a rebel. He had thrust his spear into the body of the Son of God. He fell to his knees once again, but this time as a believer. The Holy Scriptures don't tell us every detail of what happened next, but church tradition and various ancient writings tell us the rest of the story. Longinus, shaken and disturbed by what he had witnessed, could not simply return to the camp as if nothing had happened. For days, sleep escaped him. The image of Christ hanging from the cross, silent and still, haunted him like a fire that refused to go out. He could no longer follow orders without wondering if he was serving truth or a blind empire. After the crucifixion, rumors began spreading through Jerusalem. Whispers that Jesus' tomb had been found empty. Some spoke of visions and encounters with the very man he had watched die that day on the cross. The centurion listened in silence, but every word reached deep inside, lighting something new in his heart. In the depths of his soul, he knew it was no lie. Something inside him whispered that death had not been the end. For days he found no peace. Images of Golgotha haunted him like a sacred fire. He remembered every word Jesus spoke, every look, every silence, and while the world returned to its routines, he could not return to his. He could no longer be the ruthless centurion he'd been for years. His heart, once forged from iron and bloodshed, began to crack. When he heard the rumors that some had seen him alive, he wasn't surprised. He felt no doubt or confusion, only quiet, powerful certainty. Yes, it was true. Jesus had defeated death. For the first time, Longinus began to truly understand faith. For the first time, he grasped the real meaning of the cross, the miracle of forgiveness, and the mighty power of salvation. Finally, he understood. He quit his position. He took off his armor, returned his sword, and without looking back, left the Roman army. And so began his journey of faith. He joined the disciples, sought out those who had known Jesus, and started to learn about the very one he had once executed. His name, Longinus, began to spread among the first believers. The Roman Centurion, who had led men in the name of empire, now walked barefoot, his heart on fire, proclaiming a king whom he had once helped crucify. For years, he traveled throughout the regions of Cappadocia and Caesarea in modern-day Turkey, proclaiming the name of the one he had once crucified. "I watched him die," he would say, "yet in his death, I found life." His testimony was powerful. He didn't speak from theory or second-hand stories. He had been there himself, and his story moved hearts. The hand that once held the sword now boldly raised the word of the gospel. There, Longinus preached the good news, and many believed. Because he wasn't just any preacher, he was the Centurion who had stood at the foot of the cross. But Rome did not forgive those who turned away from its authority, and so persecution soon followed. Longinus was arrested. He was questioned, beaten, and threatened with death. They offered him freedom in exchange for denying Christ. But Longinus, with the peace of one who had discovered the truth, responded with unwavering faith. So he was condemned. The same empire that once trained him as a soldier would now execute him as a traitor. They took him outside the city, and there on top of a lonely hill, he was beheaded. Longinus died as a martyr, not in fear, but with eyes lifted upward, copying the one he had watched raise his gaze on the cross and say, "Father, into your hands I give my spirit." His body was buried in the region of Cappadocia, and soon local Christians began honoring him as a saint. Many claimed that miracles and healing happened at his tomb, and his name became known not as an executioner, but as a witness, as a believer, as a martyr. And so, through the passing centuries, the church recognized him as a saint, Saint Longinus, the one who saw, the one who believed, the one who died for him, who first died for him. But he wasn't alone. You need to learn about Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, and James. From the streets of Jerusalem to the far corners of the earth, these 12 men carried a message powerful enough to challenge kings, tear down temples, and split history itself in two. They had no army, no swords, no political alliances. All they had was faith in what they'd seen and their own testimony. The story of Longinus reminds us that no heart is too hard for God to change. No past is too dark for his light to reach. No life is too broken for his love to restore. If a Roman centurion who helped crucify Jesus could become a saint who died for him, then there's hope for every one of us. God can use your story too, no matter how it started. Hit that like button and subscribe to Bible Breakdown Hub for more incredible stories of faith that will strengthen your walk with God and show you just how amazing His grace really is.